The rope burns on Miriam's wrists told her she had been tied up for nearly 3 days, and the stale taste of fear in her mouth reminded her that screaming would only bring more trouble from the men who had dragged her from her father's ranch in the dead of night. She pressed herself against the rough wooden wall of the abandoned miner's cabin, listening to the rustlers outside argue about how much ransom they could squeeze from Charles Crawford, the wealthiest cattle baron in Florissant, Colorado, a man who valued his reputation more than anything except perhaps his only daughter. The year was 1878, and the Colorado Territory had only been a state for 2 years. Lawlessness still ran thick in these mountain towns, despite the promises of civilization creeping westward. Miriam had grown up hearing stories of kidnappings and cattle thefts, but she had always believed her father's influence would protect her. How wrong she had been. Through the gaps in the warped boards, she could see 4 men gathered around a campfire. The leader, a scar-faced man named Dutch, kept spitting tobacco into the flames while he outlined his plan to send word to her father. They wanted $5,000 in safe passage out of Colorado. If Crawford refused or contacted the sheriff, they would kill Miriam and disappear into the mountains where no posse could track them. Miriam closed her eyes and tried to steady her breathing. She was 21 years old, educated in Denver, and accustomed to fine dresses and social gatherings. Nothing in her comfortable life had prepared her for this nightmare. Her traveling dress was torn at the hem, her dark hair had fallen loose from its pins, and her face bore the dirt and sweat of captivity. She had been returning from visiting her aunt in Colorado Springs when the stagecoach had been ambushed. The driver had been shot, the other passengers robbed and left behind, but Miriam had been taken because Dutch had recognized her as Crawford's daughter. The cabin door swung open, and Dutch stepped inside, his cold eyes studying her. "Hope you are comfortable, Miss Crawford. Your daddy should be getting our message right about now." Miriam lifted her chin despite her fear. "My father will bring every lawman in the territory down on you." Dutch laughed, a sound like gravel grinding together. "That is what I'm counting on. See, we have another plan too. If your daddy gets smart and brings the law, we have friends who will make sure your pretty little ranch burns to the ground. Either way, we get what we want." He left her alone again, and Miriam felt tears threaten to spill. She refused to cry. Her mother had died when she was 12, and her father had raised her to be strong. She would find a way through this. The sun climbed higher in the sky, turning the cabin into a stifling box. Miriam's throat ached with thirst and her stomach cramped with hunger. The rustlers had given her water twice and some hardtack once, but it was barely enough to sustain her. She wondered if her father had received the ransom demand yet, wondered if he was organizing the money or calling in favors from powerful friends. As afternoon shadows began to stretch across the mountain clearing, Miriam heard new voices outside. She pressed her ear to the wall, trying to understand what was happening. "Who the hell are you?" Dutch's voice carried suspicion and alarm. A different voice responded, deeper and calmer than any Miriam had heard in days. "Name is Levi Donovan. I'm here to make a trade." Miriam's heart hammered. She did not know anyone named Levi Donovan, and she could not imagine what business a stranger had with her captors. "We are not trading nothing," Dutch said. "Get lost before I put a bullet in you." "I heard you have Charles Crawford's daughter," Levi said, his tone unchanged. "I want to buy her from you." Miriam's breath caught. Buy her? What kind of madness was this? Dutch laughed again. "You want to buy her? What are you, some kind of fool? Crawford is worth thousands. What could you possibly offer?" "Everything I have," Levi said simply. "I have been trapping these mountains for 8 years. I have furs worth $2,000 stored in my cabin, plus gold dust I have panned from the streams, another 1,000 in gold. I have 3 horses, all strong mountain stock. I have weapons, supplies, and equipment worth another 500. And I have information about a silver vein up in the high country that is worth more than anything Crawford could pay you." The clearing fell silent except for the crackling fire. Miriam could hardly believe what she was hearing. A mountain man wanted to trade everything he owned for her freedom? It made no sense. Mountain men were solitary creatures, more comfortable with wilderness than people. Why would one sacrifice his entire livelihood for a woman he had never met? "Why would you do that?" Dutch asked, the exact question racing through Miriam's mind. "That's my business," Levi said. "Do we have a deal or not?" Because if you refuse, I will go straight to the Crawford ranch and tell them exactly where you are holding her. Then you will have nothing except a noose waiting for you." "You threatening us?" Another rustler spoke up, his voice tight with anger. "I am offering you a fair trade," Levi said. 3,000 in cash and goods, information about a silver strike and safe passage. I will even guide you to the mountain pass that leads to Utah territory. No lawmen patrol that route. You can be across the border before Crawford even knows his daughter is free." Miriam heard the rustlers conferring in low voices. Her mind spun with confusion and a strange, desperate hope. This mountain man, whoever he was, represented her only chance at freedom. But what would he want in return? Men did not trade their entire fortune without expecting something. "How do we know you have what you say you have?" Dutch asked. "Come to my cabin and see for yourself," Levi said. "It is 2 miles north of here, up the canyon. Bring the woman. Once you see I'm telling the truth, we make the exchange there. I have everything ready." More whispered discussion followed. Miriam pressed harder against the wall, trying to hear every word. Finally, Dutch spoke again. "All right, mountain man, we will come see your treasure. But if you are lying or if this is a trick, the girl dies first, understand?" "Understood," Levi said. "Let me see her first, though. I need to know she is unharmed." Footsteps approached the cabin, and then the door opened. Dutch grabbed Miriam's arm and hauled her to her feet, pushing her outside into the bright sunlight. She squinted against the glare, trying to focus on the man who had come to bargain for her life. Levi Donovan stood in the clearing like something carved from the mountain itself. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with shoulders so broad they strained against his buckskin shirt. His arms were thick with muscle, his hands large and capable looking. He wore his dark brown hair longer than was fashionable, tied back with a leather cord, and his face was weathered from years in the elements. A thick beard covered his jaw, but his eyes were what caught Miriam's attention. They were a startling shade of blue-gray, like storm clouds over the peaks, and they held an intensity that made her breath catch. Those eyes swept over her, taking in her disheveled state, the rope burns on her wrists, the exhaustion in her face. Something flickered in his expression, something that looked almost like pain, before his features settled back into careful neutrality. "She looks alive enough," Levi said. "Let us go to my cabin and finish this business." Dutch kept a firm grip on Miriam's arm as the group prepared to move. 2 of the other rustlers saddled horses while the 4th gathered their supplies. Miriam found herself lifted onto a horse, her hands still bound, with Dutch climbing up behind her. Levi mounted his own horse, a large buckskin gelding that looked as strong and capable as its owner. They rode north through the pine forest, climbing higher into the mountains. The air grew cooler and thinner, scented with pine sap and wildflowers. Miriam tried to study her surroundings, looking for any opportunity to escape. But with her hands bound and Dutch's arm around her waist, she was helpless. The journey took nearly an hour over rough terrain. When they finally emerged into another clearing, Miriam saw a sturdy log cabin with a corral containing 2 more horses. The cabin was larger than she expected, well built with a stone chimney and glass windows. Smoke rose from the chimney, suggesting someone else was inside. Levi dismounted and walked to the cabin door. "Everything is inside, like I said. Come and see." The rustlers dismounted as well, keeping their weapons ready. Dutch dragged Miriam down from the horse and pushed her toward the cabin. Levi stepped aside to let them enter first, his face expressionless. Inside, the cabin was surprisingly clean and organized. Bundles of furs were stacked along one wall, at least 50 pelts of various types, including beaver, fox, and marten. On the rough-hewn table sat several leather pouches, and when Dutch opened one, gold dust glittered in the lamplight. "Count it," Levi said. 3,000 total between the furs, the gold, and the other supplies. The horses in the corral are included. I kept only my own mount." While the rustlers examined the goods, Miriam studied Levi more carefully. He moved with the confidence of a man who knew exactly what he was doing. No wasted motion, no nervous energy. His muscles flexed beneath his shirt as he lifted one of the fur bundles to show its quality. Despite his rough appearance, there was something almost gentle in the way he handled things, a carefulness that seemed at odds with his powerful frame. "What about this silver vein you mentioned?" Dutch asked. Levi pulled a folded paper from his pocket and spread it on the table. It was a hand-drawn map showing the mountain passes and valleys around Florissant. He pointed to a location high in the peaks. Right here. I found the vein 3 months ago but never filed a claim. The silver runs deep into the mountain. A man with the right equipment could pull out $50,000 worth in a year. Dutch studied the map with greedy eyes. How do we know this is real? Levi reached into another pouch and pulled out a chunk of raw ore streaked with silver. I brought this sample down. Take it to any assayer and they will confirm it is rich ore. The rustlers gathered around, passing the ore between them. Miriam could see the calculation in their faces. They had come looking for $5,000 in ransom, but Levi was offering them $3,000 in immediate goods, plus information that could make them wealthy beyond their dreams. Why are you giving all this up for one woman? Dutch asked again. Levi's eyes moved to Miriam, holding her gaze for a long moment. Because some things matter more than money. The simple statement hung in the air. Miriam felt something shift in her chest, a strange warmth despite her fear and exhaustion. This man, this stranger, was sacrificing everything he had worked for, everything he owned, to save her. The weight of that gesture was almost overwhelming. Dutch finally nodded. All right, Mountain Man, we have a deal, but we are taking the horses and half the supplies with us now. You can keep the woman and whatever else is left. The horses are yours, Levi agreed, but I need enough supplies to get through winter. Take what you need for the journey, leave the rest. The negotiations continued for another hour while Miriam sat in a chair near the fireplace, trying to process everything happening around her. The rustlers picked through the cabin stores, taking food, ammunition, blankets, and other supplies. They loaded the furs onto pack horses and divided the gold between them. Dutch folded the map carefully and tucked it inside his coat. Finally, as the sun began to set behind the mountains, Dutch cut the ropes binding Miriam's wrists. She is all yours, Mountain Man. If I were you, I would keep her close. There are worse men than us in these mountains. The rustlers mounted their horses and rode out, leading the pack animals and Levi's extra horses. The sound of hoofbeats faded into the forest, leaving Miriam and Levi alone in the gathering darkness. Miriam rubbed her raw wrists, trying to restore circulation. Her mind churned with questions, but her voice came out barely above a whisper. Why did you do that? Levi moved to the fireplace and added wood to the flames. You needed help. You gave up everything you own for a stranger. He glanced at her, those storm cloud eyes unreadable. Not everything. I still have my horse, my weapons, and enough supplies to start over. I have lived in these mountains long enough to know how to survive with less. Miriam stood on shaky legs, steadying herself against the chair. I do not understand. You could have gone to my father, told him where I was being held. He would have paid you a reward. By the time I found your father and he organized a rescue, those men might have killed you, Levi said quietly, or moved you somewhere I could not track. I had the resources they wanted. It was faster and safer this way. But you lost everything. Levi turned to face her fully, and in the firelight, his expression softened slightly. I gained something more valuable. Your life. The simple honesty in his words made Miriam's eyes burn with tears she had been holding back for 3 days. This man, this mountain stranger, had valued her life more than his own fortune. The weight of his sacrifice, the pure nobility of it, broke through the walls she had built to survive her captivity. She sank back into the chair and finally let herself cry. Great shuddering sobs shook her shoulders as all the fear and trauma of the past days poured out. She cried for the terror of being dragged from the stagecoach, for the uncertainty of whether she would live or die, for the horror of being held captive by men who saw her only as currency. And she cried with relief, overwhelming and dizzying, that she was finally safe. Levi knelt beside her chair, not touching, but close enough that she could feel his presence. You are safe now, he said, his deep voice gentle. I promise I will get you home to your father. Miriam wiped her eyes and looked at him through her tears. How can you promise that? You gave away your horses. We are miles from anywhere. We will ride together on my horse, Levi said. It is a long journey back to Florissant, but he is strong enough to carry us both. We will leave at first light. I do not even know you, Miriam said, though the words felt hollow even as she spoke them. This man had traded everything he owned to save her. What more did she need to know about his character? "My name is Levi Donovan," he said. "I am 30 years old. I came to Colorado 8 years ago from Montana Territory. I have been living in these mountains, trapping and hunting since then. I'm not much for town life or people, but I'm not the kind of man who can ignore someone in need." "How did you even know I was taken?" "I was down at the trading post in Hartselle 2 days ago. I heard the stagecoach driver talking about the robbery before he died. He managed to make it to town and tell the sheriff what happened before his wounds killed him. He said Dutch and his gang took a young woman. I asked around and learned you were Charles Crawford's daughter." "And you came looking for me," Miriam said, trying to understand the mind of this remarkable man. "I knew these mountains better than any posse," Levi said. "I knew where rustlers hide when they are working this territory. I found their camp this morning and watched long enough to confirm you were alive. Then I went back to my cabin and prepared my offer." Miriam shook her head in wonder. "You did all that for someone you never met." "My mother used to say that we are judged not by what we keep, but by what we are willing to give up for others," Levi said. "She was a good woman. She would have been ashamed of me if I had done nothing." There was a depth of sadness in his voice when he mentioned his mother. Miriam sensed a story there, loss and pain that had shaped this solitary mountain man into someone capable of such selfless sacrifice. "Is your mother gone?" she asked gently. Levi nodded. 7 years now. Fever took her and my father both, back in Montana. I came to Colorado to start fresh after they died." "I'm sorry for your loss," Miriam said. "I lost my mother when I was 12. I understand how that absence shapes you." Something changed in Levi's expression, a recognition of shared grief. "It does shape you," he agreed. "Makes you understand what truly matters." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the fire crackling between them. Miriam found herself studying Levi's face more closely, seeing past the rough exterior to the man beneath. His features were strong and angular, his nose slightly crooked as if it had been broken once, his jaw square beneath his beard. But his eyes held a kindness that belied his intimidating size and strength. "You should eat something," Levi said, rising to his feet. "When did they last feed you?" "This morning. Some hardtack and water." Levi moved to the cabin's small kitchen area and began preparing food. Miriam watched as he sliced venison from a haunch hanging near the window, added it to a pot with vegetables and water, and hung the pot over the fire. His movements were efficient and practiced, the work of a man accustomed to caring for himself. "It will take about an hour to cook," he said. "In the meantime, there's a water barrel outside and clean cloths if you want to wash up. I will wait out there while you have privacy." The thoughtfulness of the gesture touched Miriam deeply. She nodded her thanks and Levi stepped outside, closing the door behind him. Miriam found the cloths and filled a basin with water from the barrel he had brought inside earlier. She stripped off her torn dress and undergarments, wincing at the bruises on her arms and ribs where the rustlers had handled her roughly. The cool water felt like heaven against her skin. She scrubbed away 3 days of dirt, sweat, and fear, washing her hair as best she could and combing out the tangles with her fingers. Levi had left clean clothes on the bed, likely belonging to him since she saw no sign that any woman had ever lived here. She pulled on a soft cotton shirt that hung to her knees and wool trousers that she had to tie tightly to keep from falling down. The clothes smelled of pine and leather, of the mountains and wilderness. When she opened the door, Levi was sitting on the porch steps whittling a piece of wood. He stood immediately, his eyes quickly taking in her appearance before he looked away respectfully. "The stew should be ready," he said, leading her back inside. They ate in silence at first, Miriam too hungry to do anything but devour the simple meal. The venison was tender, the vegetables cooked perfectly, and the broth warmed her from the inside. It was the best thing she had ever tasted, though that was probably due to her hunger and relief as much as the actual cooking. "This is wonderful," she said when she finally paused for breath. "Thank you." "You're welcome." Levi refilled her bowl without her asking. "Eat as much as you want. I have plenty more." As her initial hunger subsided, Miriam found herself able to think more clearly. "What will you do now?" she asked. "You gave up your livelihood for me." Levi shrugged his broad shoulders. "I will start over. I know how to trap, how to hunt. The mountains provide for those who know how to ask. It will take time to rebuild what I had, but I will manage." "My father will reward you," Miriam said. He is a wealthy man. He will pay you far more than what you gave up." "I do not want his money," Levi said firmly. "I did not do this for a reward." "Then why?" Miriam set down her spoon, meeting his eyes across the table. "Please help me understand. Why would you sacrifice everything for a complete stranger?" Levi was quiet for a long moment, his fingers tracing the grain in the wooden table. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight of old pain. 8 years ago, before I came to Colorado, I was engaged to be married. Her name was Sarah. She was everything I thought I wanted in a wife, kind, pretty, from a good family. We were planning our wedding when a gang of outlaws came through our town in Montana. He paused, his jaw clenching. Miriam waited, sensing he needed to tell the story his own way. "They robbed the bank," Levi continued. "Sarah was inside making a deposit for her father's store. The outlaws took her as a hostage when the sheriff tried to stop them. They said they would release her once they got away safely. I was working at my father's lumber mill when I heard. By the time I got to town, they were already riding out with Sarah." Miriam's heart constricted. She could guess where the story was going. "I wanted to go after them immediately," Levi said. "But the sheriff made me wait. He said we needed to organize a proper posse, get enough men together to ensure success. So I waited. We waited 2 days while he got his posse together. When we finally tracked the outlaws down, we found Sarah's body in a ravine. They had killed her and thrown her away like she was nothing." "Oh, Levi," Miriam whispered, her own eyes filling with tears. "If I had gone after her immediately, if I had traded everything I owned right then to get her back, maybe she would still be alive," Levi said, his voice rough with emotion. "I have lived with that regret every day for 8 years, so when I heard that another woman had been taken by outlaws, I knew I could not make the same mistake twice. I could not wait for a posse or worry about the cost. I had to act immediately. I had to do everything in my power to save you." The truth settled over Miriam like a blanket, warm and heavy. Levi had not saved her because he knew her, or because he expected a reward. He had saved her because he was trying to redeem himself for a failure that was never his fault in the first place. He was trying to save Sarah by saving her. "What happened to Sarah was not your fault," Miriam said gently. "You could not have known what those men would do." "Maybe not," Levi said, "but I knew what I should have done. I should have moved heaven and earth to get her back. Instead, I waited. I followed the rules. And she died because of it." Miriam reached across the table and placed her hand over his. His hand was huge compared to hers, calloused and strong, but it trembled slightly at her touch. "You saved me," she said firmly. "You did move heaven and earth. You gave up everything you spent 8 years building. Sarah would be proud of you. I am certain of it." Levi's eyes met hers, and Miriam saw the depth of pain he had been carrying all these years. But she also saw a flicker of something else, a fragile hope that perhaps he had finally done enough, that perhaps he had finally made amends. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for saying that." They sat like that for a long moment, hands touching across the table, two people bound together by trauma and sacrifice, and the beginning of something neither of them could quite name yet. The fire crackled, the night deepened outside, and Miriam felt something in her chest unwind, a tension she had not even realized she was carrying. "You should rest," Levi said eventually, gently withdrawing his hand. "You have been through an ordeal. The bed is yours. I will sleep out here by the fire." "This is your home," Miriam protested. "I cannot take your bed." "You need proper rest," Levi said in a tone that brooked no argument. "I have slept in worse places than a floor in front of a warm fire. Please, do not argue with me on this." Miriam was too exhausted to fight. She nodded and moved toward the bedroom area, which was separated from the main cabin by a hanging blanket. The bed was simple but sturdy, covered with thick furs and wool blankets. She climbed in fully clothed, still wearing Levi's shirt and trousers, and pulled the covers up to her chin. For the first time in 3 days, she felt truly safe. The knowledge that Levi was just on the other side of the blanket, that this powerful, honorable man stood between her and any danger, allowed her to finally relax. She closed her eyes and let sleep take her, dreamless and deep. Miriam woke to the smell of coffee and bacon frying. Pale morning light filtered through the cabin's windows, and she could hear Levi moving around quietly, trying not to disturb her. She lay still for a moment, letting herself adjust to being free, to being safe, to the strange new reality of her situation. When she emerged from the bedroom area, Levi looked up from the stove. "Morning. How did you sleep?" "Better than I have in days," Miriam admitted. "Thank you for everything." "Breakfast is almost ready," Levi said. "Then we should head out. The sooner I get you home, the sooner your father can stop worrying." They ate quickly, and then Levi helped Miriam gather what few supplies they would need for the journey. He packed food, water, blankets, and his weapons into saddlebags and secured them to his horse. The buckskin gelding stood patiently, accustomed to his master's preparations. "His name is Thunder," Levi said, stroking the horse's neck. "He is the strongest, smartest horse I have ever owned. He will get us home safely." Levi mounted first, then reached down to pull Miriam up behind him. She wrapped her arms around his waist, feeling the solid muscle beneath his shirt, the warmth of his body against hers. It should have felt awkward or uncomfortable, being pressed so close to a man she had only met yesterday, but instead it felt natural, even comforting. They rode out as the sun climbed over the eastern peaks, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. The journey back to Florissant would take at least 2 days, Levi explained, maybe 3 depending on the weather and the trails. They would camp along the way, traveling carefully to avoid any more encounters with outlaws or rustlers. As Thunder picked his way down the mountain trails, Miriam found herself relaxing into the rhythm of riding, her body pressed against Levi's back, his strong presence steadying her. They did not talk much at first, but the silence was comfortable, companionable. Around midday, they stopped to rest the horse and eat some dried meat and biscuits. Miriam sat on a fallen log while Levi watered Thunder at a small stream. "Tell me about Florissant," Levi said. "I have never been to your town." "It is small but growing," Miriam said. "My father's ranch is one of the largest in the area. We run cattle and horses. The town has a church, a general store, a saloon, and a few other businesses. It is nothing like Denver, where I went to school, but it is home." "Do you miss Denver?" "Sometimes," Miriam admitted. "I miss the culture, the society, the beautiful buildings and theaters. But I also love the ranch, the mountains, the open space. I feel torn between 2 worlds sometimes." "What do you do on the ranch?" Levi asked with genuine curiosity. "I help manage the books, organize the social events for the Ranchers Association, and sometimes help with the horses. My father wanted me to have an education, to be refined and cultured, but he also raised me to understand the business. He says someday the ranch will be mine, and I need to know how to run it." "Sounds like he is a wise man," Levi observed. "He is," Miriam said warmly. "He can be stubborn and overbearing at times, but he has always wanted the best for me. He must be frantic with worry right now." "We will get you home soon," Levi promised. "Another day and a half of riding." They mounted again and continued through the afternoon. The landscape was breathtakingly beautiful, pine forests giving way to meadows filled with wildflowers, mountain streams cutting through rocky valleys, and always the peaks rising around them, majestic and eternal. Miriam had lived in Colorado her whole life, but she had never seen it quite like this, from horseback, moving slowly enough to appreciate every detail. As evening approached, Levi guided Thunder off the main trail to a small clearing with good water and shelter. He helped Miriam down from the horse, his hands gentle on her waist, and she felt a flutter in her stomach at his touch. She had been trying not to think too much about the fact that she was intensely attracted to this man, this stranger who had saved her life. It seemed inappropriate somehow, too soon, too complicated. But watching him move around the camp, building a fire with practiced ease, caring for his horse, and preparing their dinner, Miriam could not deny the growing feelings in her heart. Levi Donovan was unlike any man she had ever known. The men in her social circle in Denver had been refined and educated, but often shallow and self-centered. The ranch hands who worked for her father were rough and hard-working, but often coarse in manner and limited in perspective. Levi was something else entirely. He had the strength and capability of a true frontiersman, able to survive and thrive in the wilderness that would kill lesser men. But he also had a depth of character, a thoughtfulness and honor that spoke to education of a different kind. He had been shaped by loss and hardship into something remarkable, a man who would give up everything he owned to save a stranger's life. "You are staring," Levi said, glancing up from the fire with a slight smile. Miriam felt her cheeks heat. I'm sorry. I was just thinking. About what? About how lucky I am that you found me, she said honestly. About what kind of man sacrifices everything for a stranger. About how I'm going to explain to my father that I owe you a debt I can never repay. Levi's smile faded. You owe me nothing, Miriam. Can I call you Miriam? Of course. You owe me nothing, he repeated. Seeing you safe and free is payment enough. But what will you do after you deliver me home? Miriam asked. Where will you go? You have no cabin now, no supplies except what we are carrying. I will head back into the mountains, Levi said. Maybe further north or west toward the Utah border. I will find a new place to build a cabin, start trapping again. I have done it before. I can do it again. The thought of Levi disappearing back into the wilderness, of never seeing him again after he delivered her home, made Miriam's chest tighten with an emotion she was not quite ready to name. That seems so lonely, she said quietly. Living alone in the mountains with no one to talk to, no companionship. I'm accustomed to solitude, Levi said. It is easier than dealing with people most of the time. Is that what you really want? To be alone forever? Levi was quiet for a long moment, staring into the flames. I used to think so, he finally said. After Sarah died, I convinced myself that I was better off alone, that I could not be hurt if I did not let anyone get close. But these past 2 days with you have reminded me what I have been missing. Conversation, laughter, someone to share meals with, someone to care about. His words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Miriam's heart raced. Was he saying what she thought he was saying? Levi, she began, but he held up his hand. I know this is complicated, he said. You are Charles Crawford's daughter. You have a life waiting for you in Florissant, a future full of possibilities. I am just a mountain man with nothing to offer. But I want you to know that these 2 days with you have meant more to me than 8 years alone in these mountains. Miriam stood and moved closer to the fire, closer to Levi. What if I do not want you to disappear back into the wilderness? Levi looked up at her, his storm cloud eyes wide with surprise. What are you saying? I'm saying that you are not just some mountain man who saved me, Miriam said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. You are the most honorable, courageous, selfless man I have ever met. You gave up everything for me. You shared your story with me. You have treated me with nothing but kindness and respect. How am I supposed to just say goodbye to you and never see you again? Miriam. Her name was almost a whisper on his lips. You do not know what you are saying. You are grateful, and that is understandable, but gratitude is not the same as... I know the difference between gratitude and attraction, Miriam interrupted. I am not some naive girl. I am a grown woman, and I know my own heart. I am grateful to you, yes, but I am also drawn to you in a way I have never experienced with anyone else. Levi stood slowly, his full height and breadth suddenly overwhelming in the firelight. He took a step toward her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body, could smell the pine and leather scent that clung to him. If I allow myself to feel what I am feeling, Levi said, his voice rough with emotion, there will be no going back. I will not be able to walk away from you. I will not be able to watch you return to your life and marry some wealthy rancher's son and forget about the mountain man who saved you once. Then do not walk away, Miriam said, reaching up to touch his face, feeling the softness of his beard beneath her fingers. Stay with me. Come to Florissant. Help my father on the ranch. Build a new life there instead of in the wilderness. Your father will never approve, Levi said, but he did not pull away from her touch. I have nothing to offer you. No money, no property, no social standing. You have yourself, Miriam said. That is more than enough. Levi's hand came up to cover hers where it rested on his cheek. His eyes searched her face, looking for doubt or uncertainty. Whatever he saw there must have satisfied him, because he slowly, carefully, as if giving her every chance to pull away, lowered his head and kissed her. The kiss was gentle at first, almost tentative, but when Miriam pressed closer and wrapped her arms around his neck, Levi deepened it, pulling her against his chest. His lips were warm and firm, his beard surprisingly soft against her skin. Miriam felt like she was falling and flying at the same time, her whole body alive with sensation. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Levi rested his forehead against hers. "Are you sure about this?" he asked. "Once we cross this line, once I admit that I am falling in love with you, everything changes." "I want everything to change," Miriam whispered. "I want you in my life, Levi Donovan. I want to wake up every morning knowing you are there. I want to fall asleep in your arms. I want to build a future with you." "You barely know me," Levi said, but his arms tightened around her. I know enough," Miriam said. "I know you are honorable and brave. I know you value life and freedom above money. I know you have suffered loss, but it made you compassionate instead of bitter. I know that when you commit to something, you commit completely, with everything you have. That is enough for me." Levi kissed her again, longer and deeper this time, and Miriam lost herself in the feeling of being held by this strong, gentle man. When they finally settled down for the night, Levi insisted on maintaining propriety, spreading his bedroll on one side of the fire while Miriam took the other. But they lay there talking quietly until the stars wheeled overhead, sharing stories of their childhoods, their dreams, their fears. Miriam learned that Levi had been raised by his parents on a small farm in Montana, that he had learned to hunt and trap from his father and to read and write from his mother. He had been engaged to Sarah for only 6 months before she was killed. He had never returned to Montana after coming to Colorado, too painful to face the memories. Levi learned that Miriam had been educated in Denver at a finishing school for young ladies, that she spoke French and played piano, that she loved to ride horses and read adventure novels. Her mother had died from influenza, and her father had never remarried, pouring all his love and attention into raising his only child. She had received several marriage proposals from suitable young men, but had never felt the connection she was supposed to feel, the spark that would make her want to spend her life with someone. "I feel that spark with you," she admitted in the darkness. "I know it is fast, maybe too fast, but I cannot deny it." "I feel it too," Levi said from across the fire. "I have felt it since the moment I saw you in that clearing, even tied up and terrified. There was something about you, a strength and dignity that called to me." "We will make this work," Miriam said with certainty. "I do not care what obstacles we face. We will overcome them together." The next day, they rode through some of the most beautiful country Miriam had ever seen. Levi pointed out landmarks and told her stories of his years in the mountains, of encounters with bears and mountain lions, of winter storms that buried his cabin in snow, of the profound peace that came from watching the sun rise over the peaks with no other human for miles around. "Will you miss it?" Miriam asked. "The solitude and the wilderness?" "Parts of it," Levi admitted. "But I think I will appreciate the wilderness even more if I have someone to come home to, if I have a reason to return from my expeditions." "You could still trap and hunt," Miriam said. "My father's ranch borders thousands of acres of wild country. You could work the ranch part of the year and trap in the mountains the rest of the time. The ranch always needs supplies, meat and furs included. You could sell directly to us." "You have been thinking about this," Levi observed with amusement. "I want you to be happy," Miriam said simply. "I want to find a way for both of us to have what we need." By late afternoon on the second day, they began to recognize the country around Florissant. The distinctive rock formations and the particular way the mountains framed the valley told them they were close. Levi pushed Thunder a bit harder, eager to get Miriam home before nightfall. They crested a final hill just as the sun was setting, and there below them sprawled the Crawford Ranch. The main house was a large, well-built structure with a wraparound porch and multiple chimneys. Barns, corrals, and outbuildings dotted the property, and Miriam could see cattle grazing in the distance. Smoke rose from the chimney, and lanterns were being lit in the windows as evening fell. "Home," Miriam breathed. "I did not think I would ever see it again." "You are safe now," Levi said. "Let us go tell your father the good news." They rode down toward the ranch, and as they approached, a shout went up from one of the ranch hands. Within moments, the yard was full of people, and a tall, distinguished man with silver hair came running out of the house. "Miriam!" Charles Crawford's voice broke with emotion as he reached up to pull his daughter down from the horse. He crushed her in a hug, tears streaming down his weathered face. "Oh my God, Miriam, I thought I had lost you." "I am fine, Papa," Miriam said, clinging to her father. "I am fine." Charles pulled back, examining her face, checking for injuries. Did they hurt you? What happened? The sheriff said the Rustlers demanded a ransom, but before I could gather the money, they just disappeared. We have been searching for days. This man saved me, Miriam said, turning to where Levi had dismounted and stood respectfully back from the family reunion. Papa, this is Levi Donovan. He tracked down the Rustlers and negotiated my release. I owe him my life. Charles Crawford turned his attention to Levi, his shrewd eyes taking in every detail of the mountain man's appearance. Is this true? You saved my daughter? I did what anyone should have done, sir, Levi said. I happened to be in the right place at the right time. The sheriff said the Rustlers were demanding $5,000, Charles said. How did you convince them to let her go? I traded everything I owned, Levi said simply. Furs, gold, supplies, and information. They decided my offer was worth more than waiting for your ransom. Charles stared at him, clearly struggling to comprehend such a sacrifice. You traded everything? For a woman you did not even know? Yes, sir. Why would you do such a thing? Levi glanced at Miriam, and the look that passed between them was so full of emotion that everyone in the yard could see it. Because some things are worth more than money, Levi said. Your daughter's life was one of those things. Charles followed Levi's gaze to Miriam and saw the way his daughter was looking at the mountain man with open affection and something deeper, something that looked very much like love. His eyes widened as understanding dawned. I see, Charles said slowly. Miriam, perhaps you should go inside and let the housekeeper draw you a bath. You must be exhausted. Mr. Donovan and I need to have a conversation. Miriam looked between her father and Levi, worried. Papa, please. Levi is a good man. I'm sure he is, Charles said. Now go inside. We will talk later. Reluctantly, Miriam went into the house, glancing back at Levi several times. He gave her a reassuring nod, though his expression was cautious. Once Miriam was inside, Charles gestured toward the porch. Let us talk, Mr. Donovan. Levi followed the older man onto the porch, and they sat in 2 chairs facing the darkening valley. For a long moment, Charles said nothing, just studied Levi with the calculating gaze of a successful businessman. How long have you known my daughter? Charles finally asked. 2 days, sir, Levi said honestly. 2 days, Charles repeated. And in 2 days you have managed to develop feelings strong enough that I can see them from across a yard? Yes, sir. I know how it must look. I know you have concerns, but I give you my word that my intentions toward your daughter are honorable. Your intentions, Charles said. What exactly are your intentions? I want to court her with your permission, Levi said. I want the chance to prove myself worthy of her. I know I have nothing to offer right now. I gave up everything I own to free her, but I am hardworking and capable. I can rebuild. I can provide for her. My daughter does not need providing for, Charles said sharply. She is the heir to one of the largest ranches in Colorado. She will want for nothing. I do not want her for her money, Levi said, meeting Charles's eyes steadily. I want her because she is brave and intelligent and kind, because she sees the best in people, because when I am with her, I feel like the man I always wanted to be. Charles leaned back in his chair, still studying Levi. Tell me about yourself. Where are you from? What is your family? What do you do? Levi told his story again, explaining his background in Montana, the loss of his parents and his fiancée, his years in the Colorado mountains as a trapper and hunter. He left nothing out, including his feelings of guilt over Sarah's death and how that had driven him to save Miriam. When he finished, Charles was quiet for a long time. Finally, he spoke. That is a hard story, Mr. Donovan. You have suffered significant loss. I have, sir, but I have also learned from it. I know what truly matters now. And what is that? People, Levi said simply. Connections, love. Those are the things worth fighting for, worth sacrificing for, not money or property or pride. Charles nodded slowly. You gave up everything to save my daughter. That is not a debt I can easily repay. I do not want repayment, Levi said. I want your permission to court Miriam, that is all. She seems quite taken with you already, Charles observed. I suspect if I refused, she would see you anyway. I would never come between you and your daughter, Levi said firmly. If you forbid this, I will respect your wishes and leave. even though it would break your heart? Even then, Charles studied him for another long moment, then slowly smiled. I believe you would. That tells me a great deal about your character. Mr. Donovan, most men would fight for what they want regardless of the cost to others. You are willing to walk away if it is best for Miriam. She loves you, Levi said. She speaks of you with great affection and respect. I would never do anything to damage that relationship. But if I give my permission, you would pursue her with everything you have? Yes, sir. Charles stood and walked to the porch railing, looking out at his ranch. I have been dreading this day since Miriam was born, he said. The day when some man would come along and take her from me. I always imagined it would be one of those smooth-talking Denver boys with their fancy clothes and empty heads. I never imagined it would be a mountain man who traded everything he owned to save her life. He turned back to Levi. But I think perhaps this is better. At least I know you value her for the right reasons. At least I know you would protect her with your life. I would, Levi said without hesitation. Then you have my permission to court my daughter, Charles said. But understand this, Mr. Donovan. If you hurt her, if you ever make her cry or give her reason to regret this, there will not be a mountain in Colorado high enough for you to hide from me. I understand, sir. And I promise you, I will spend every day for the rest of my life making sure she never regrets choosing me. Charles extended his hand, and Levi shook it firmly. Welcome to the Crawford Ranch, Levi. Now, let us get you fed and settled. You can take one of the guest rooms in the house tonight. Tomorrow we will talk about your future here. Over the next several weeks, Levi proved his worth on the Crawford Ranch. Charles put him to work with the cattle, and Levi's strength and competence quickly won over the other ranch hands. He could outwork any two men, whether they were mending fences, breaking horses, or moving livestock. His knowledge of the mountains and wilderness made him invaluable for tracking strays and scouting new grazing lands. But more importantly, everyone could see how he treated Miriam. He was unfailingly gentle and respectful with her, opening doors, pulling out chairs, listening attentively when she spoke. He courted her properly, taking her on chaperoned picnics and rides, bringing her wildflowers from the high meadows, reading to her in the evenings while Charles worked on his ledgers. Miriam blossomed under Levi's attention. She laughed more than she had in years, and everyone noticed the glow of happiness that seemed to surround her. She helped Levi adjust to ranch life, teaching him the business side of running a cattle operation, introducing him to the other ranchers and townspeople, helping him fit into a community after years of solitude. On a warm evening in late September, 3 months after Levi had brought Miriam home, he asked Charles for his daughter's hand in marriage. Charles, who had grown genuinely fond of the mountain man, gave his blessing immediately. Levi proposed to Miriam that same evening, taking her to a hilltop overlooking the ranch at sunset. He had fashioned a ring himself from a gold nugget he had been saving for years, working it into a simple but beautiful band. Miriam Crawford, he said, dropping to one knee before her, you have made me happier in these past 3 months than I have been in the last 8 years. You have reminded me what it means to live instead of just survive. You have shown me that I am capable of love even after I thought that part of me had died with Sarah. Will you marry me and make me the luckiest man in Colorado? Yes, Miriam said, tears of joy streaming down her face. Yes, 1,000 times, yes. Levi slipped the ring on her finger and stood, pulling her into his arms and kissing her as the sun painted the sky in brilliant shades of orange and gold. In that moment, both of them knew with absolute certainty that they had found what they were meant to find, that all the pain and loss and struggle had led them to this perfect moment. They were married in November in the church in Florissant. The entire town turned out for the wedding, curious to see the mountain man who had captured the heart of Charles Crawford's daughter. Miriam wore a beautiful white dress that had been her mother's, altered to fit her, and Levi wore a new suit that Charles had insisted on buying for him. He looked uncomfortable in the formal clothes, but when Miriam walked down the aisle toward him, his face lit up with such love and joy that several people in the congregation got misty-eyed. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Levi kissed Miriam with such tender passion that everyone applauded. The reception afterward was held at the ranch, with music, dancing, and enough food to feed half the county. As the evening wound down and guests began to depart, Levi and Miriam slipped away to the cabin that Charles had given them as a wedding present. It was located on the edge of the ranch property, close enough to the main house for convenience, but far enough away for privacy. Levi had spent the past month renovating it, using skills he had learned building his mountain cabin to create a comfortable home for his new bride. Inside, a fire crackled in the stone fireplace, and Miriam looked around at the space that was now theirs. Levi had built furniture by hand, crafted shelves for her books, even installed a window seat where she could sit and look out at the mountains. "It is perfect," she said, turning to him with shining eyes. "You built us a perfect home." "I want you to be happy here," Levi said, pulling her close. "I want this to be a place where we can build our life together." "I am happy wherever you are," Miriam said, reaching up to loosen his tie and unbutton his collar. "But I am especially happy right here, right now, alone with my husband for the first time." Levi's eyes darkened with desire as he understood her meaning. He swept her up in his arms, making her laugh, and carried her to the bedroom, where he laid her gently on the bed they would share for the rest of their lives. He made love to her with a tenderness and patience that showed how much he cherished her, and afterward they lay entwined in each other's arms, talking and laughing and making plans for their future. The years that followed were good ones. Levi became Charles's right-hand man on the ranch, eventually taking over most of the day-to-day operations as Charles grew older. He still went into the mountains occasionally to trap and hunt, but he always came home to Miriam, unable to stay away from her for long. Miriam helped run the business side of the ranch and became involved in the community, starting a school for the ranch children and organizing social events that brought the scattered ranching families together. She and Levi were known throughout the region as a devoted couple, still clearly in love even after the novelty of marriage wore off. 2 years after their wedding, Miriam gave birth to their first child, a strong, healthy son they named James Charles Donovan after both of their fathers. Levi was present for the birth, holding Miriam's hand through the labor and crying when he first held his son. The sight of this powerful mountain man reduced to tears by a tiny baby made even the stern midwife smile. 3 years later, they had a daughter whom they named Sarah Grace, honoring both Levi's lost love and finding peace with the past. Miriam had insisted on the name, understanding that Levi needed to acknowledge that part of his history. Baby Sarah had her father's blue-gray eyes and her mother's dark hair, and she quickly wrapped both parents around her tiny fingers. Charles Crawford lived to see both his grandchildren born and to know that his daughter was genuinely happy. He passed away peacefully in his sleep when James was 4 and Sarah was 1, content in the knowledge that his ranch would continue to thrive under Levi and Miriam's capable management. The ranch prospered under their care. Levi's knowledge of the land and Miriam's business acumen proved to be an unbeatable combination. They expanded the cattle operation, added horse breeding, and developed a reputation for fair dealing and quality stock. Other ranchers sought Levi's advice about mountain grazing and wilderness management, and Miriam became known as one of the shrewdest negotiators in the territory. But despite their success and growing wealth, Levi and Miriam never forgot what truly mattered. They raised their children with love and discipline, teaching them the value of hard work, honesty, and compassion. They remained devoted to each other, still finding time for evening walks and quiet conversations, even as their responsibilities grew. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Levi took Miriam back to the hilltop where he had proposed. Their children were with the ranch housekeeper for the evening, giving them a rare moment of privacy. As they watched the sunset paint the mountains in brilliant colors, Levi pulled Miriam close. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked. "Marrying a mountain man instead of one of those fancy Denver boys?" Miriam laughed and kissed him. "Not for one single moment. You gave up everything to save my life. I got to spend the rest of that life loving you. That is the best trade anyone has ever made." "I would do it again," Levi said seriously. "I would give up everything I have now, the ranch, the success, all of it, if it meant having one more day with you." "Fortunately, you do not have to choose," Miriam said, smiling. "We have everything, including each other." They stood there together as the stars began to appear, two people who had found each other against all odds, who had built a life and a family from sacrifice and love. The mountains rose around them, eternal and unchanging, bearing witness to their happiness. Years continued to pass in a blur of seasons and milestones. James grew into a strong, capable young man with his father's physique and his mother's quick mind. He learned ranching from Levi and business from Miriam, preparing to eventually take over the operation. Sarah became a spirited, intelligent girl who loved horses and books in equal measure. She had her father's courage and her mother's determination, and both parents knew she would make her mark on the world in her own way. Levi and Miriam had 2 more children, another son named Thomas and a second daughter called Eleanor. The cabin that had once seemed perfectly sized grew crowded with the laughter and chaos of 4 children, so Levi built additions, expanding it into a proper ranch house. Still, they kept the original bedroom and the sitting room where they had spent their first night as husband and wife, those spaces sacred to their memories. As their children grew and eventually started families of their own, Levi and Miriam found themselves with grandchildren filling the ranch with new energy. James married the daughter of a neighboring rancher and gave them 3 grandchildren. Sarah married a lawyer from Denver, but insisted on living near the ranch, adding 2 more grandchildren to the family. Thomas and Eleanor were still young, but they showed promise of following their siblings into happy, productive lives. Through it all, Levi never forgot the choice he had made that day when he rode into the Rustlers camp and offered everything he owned for Miriam's freedom. It had seemed like a sacrifice at the time, giving up 8 years of hard work and solitary accumulation. But looking back, he realized it was not a sacrifice at all. It was an investment, the best investment he had ever made. He had traded gold and furs and supplies for a life filled with love, family, purpose, and joy. He had traded loneliness for companionship, solitude for belonging, mere survival for truly living. Every morning when he woke up next to Miriam, every evening when they sat together watching the sunset, every moment spent with their children and grandchildren, he knew he had received far more than he had given up. On a crisp autumn morning when Levi was 58 and Miriam was 49, they rode together up into the mountains. It was something they did occasionally, just the 2 of them, revisiting the high country where Levi had once lived alone. They brought a picnic and spent the day exploring old trails, reminiscing about the early days of their relationship. They stopped at the site where Levi's original cabin had stood. Someone else had built there since, but the clearing was still recognizable. Levi pointed out where he had kept his furs, where he had corralled his horses, where he had stood that morning when he decided to trade everything for Miriam's life. "I thought I had so much back then," he said, looking around the clearing. "But I had nothing that really mattered. I was existing, not living. I was so caught up in accumulating things that I forgot what those things were supposed to be for." "And now?" Miriam asked, though she knew the answer. "Now I have everything that matters," Levi said, pulling her close. "I have you. I have our children and grandchildren. I have a purpose and a place in the world. I have love, Miriam, real, deep, lasting love. That is worth more than all the gold in these mountains." Miriam rested her head on his chest, listening to the strong, steady beat of his heart. "I love you, Levi Donovan. I will love you until my last breath and beyond. And I love you, Miriam Donovan. You are the best thing that ever happened to me. Saving you saved me too." They stood there in the clearing for a long time, 2 people who had found each other in the most unlikely circumstances and built something beautiful together. The mountains rose around them, the same peaks that had witnessed their first meeting, their courtship, their wedding, and all the years of their life together. As they finally mounted their horses and rode back toward the ranch, toward their family and the life they had created, both of them felt a deep sense of gratitude, not just for having found each other, but for having had the courage to take the chances that brought them together. Levi had risked everything on a stranger, trusting that some things were worth any sacrifice. Miriam had trusted a mountain man she barely knew, believing in his honor and goodness. Both of them had been rewarded beyond measure. That evening, as they sat on the porch of their home, surrounded by their children and grandchildren, watching the sun set over the mountains, Levi took Miriam's hand and squeezed it gently. She squeezed back, that simple gesture communicating everything they felt for each other after nearly 30 years of marriage. Young James, their oldest grandchild and namesake, climbed into Levi's lap. "Tell us the story, Grandpa," he demanded. "Tell us how you and Grandma met." Levi looked at Miriam, who smiled and nodded. It was a story their grandchildren never tired of hearing, the romantic tale of the mountain man who gave up everything to save the rancher's daughter. "Well," Levi began, his deep voice warm with affection and memory. "It all started when I heard that some bad men had taken a young woman from a stagecoach. I knew I had to help her, even though we had never met." The children gathered around, listening with rapt attention as Levi told the story again. He did not leave out the hard parts, the loss of Sarah, the years of loneliness, the decision to trade everything he owned. Children needed to understand that life had difficulties, but they also needed to know that those difficulties could be overcome. And then what happened? Little Sarah, their youngest granddaughter, asked even though she had heard this story dozens of times. "Then I met your grandmother," Levi said, his eyes finding Miriam's across the porch, "and I realized that sometimes you have to give up everything to gain what truly matters. I traded 8 years of work and everything I owned for one chance to save her life, and in return, I got to spend the rest of my life loving the most wonderful woman in the world." "That is so romantic," Sarah sighed. Sarah. "Edihater." "It is not just romantic," Miriam said, speaking up. "It is a lesson about what truly matters in life. Your grandfather could have walked away. He could have told himself that my rescue was not his responsibility, but he chose to act, to sacrifice, to give of himself even when there was no guarantee he would get anything in return. That is the kind of person he is. That is the kind of person I hope all of you will be." The children nodded seriously, understanding that their grandparents were teaching them something important. As the evening deepened and stars began to appear, the family remained together on the porch, talking and laughing and simply enjoying each other's company. Later, after the children had been taken to bed and the younger generation had retired to their own homes, Levi and Miriam sat alone on the porch swing he had built for her 20th wedding anniversary. The ranch was quiet except for the normal sounds of night, cattle lowing in the distance, an owl hooting from the barn, the wind sighing through the pines. "Do you remember the night we camped on the way back to Florissant?" Miriam asked, "when we first told each other how we felt?" "I remember every moment of those days," Levi said. "I remember being terrified that you would reject me, that you would see me as just some rough mountain man who had helped you once." "I saw you as the man you are," Miriam said, "strong and kind and honorable. I still see you that way." "Even though I'm getting old?" Levi asked with a slight smile. "My hair's going gray, my joints ache in the morning, and I cannot ride as long as I used to." "You are still the most handsome man I've ever seen," Miriam said firmly, "and you are mine." Levi laughed and pulled her closer. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the moon rise over the mountains. After nearly 30 years of marriage, they did not need constant conversation. Sometimes just being together was enough. As the years continued to pass, Levi and Miriam grew older but remained devoted to each other. They faced the challenges that came with age, the aches and pains, the loss of friends, the changes in the world around them. But they faced everything together, drawing strength from their love and their shared history. When Levi was 65, he was kicked by a horse and broke his leg badly. The doctor said he might never walk without a limp again. Miriam nursed him through the long recovery, sitting by his bedside, keeping his spirits up, helping him through the painful physical therapy. Levi's leg healed stronger than the doctor predicted, and while he did walk with a slight limp afterward, he was still capable of ranch work. When Miriam was 60, she fell ill with pneumonia and nearly died. Levi refused to leave her side, sleeping in a chair next to her bed, praying with an intensity he had not felt since the day he rode out to save her from the Rustlers. When she finally recovered, he held her close and whispered that he could not live without her, that she had to promise never to scare him like that again. Through sickness and health, through good years and bad, through the joys of watching their family grow and the sorrows of inevitable loss, Levi and Miriam remained committed to each other and to the love they had built together. On their 40th wedding anniversary, their entire extended family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. There were children and grandchildren, and now even a few great-grandchildren running around. The house that Levi had built had been expanded multiple times to accommodate family gatherings like this. As Levi and Miriam stood together greeting guests, accepting congratulations and telling stories about their life together, they marveled at how rich their lives had become. All of this, the family, the ranch, the love and laughter, had started with one decision made in a mountain clearing nearly 41 years ago. That evening, after the party had wound down and most of the guests had gone home, their children gathered them in the main sitting room. James, now a successful rancher himself and father of 5, stood to make a speech. "Mom, Dad," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "we wanted to take a moment to thank you, not just for this wonderful anniversary celebration, but for everything you have taught us. You showed us what real love looks like. You showed us that sacrifice and commitment matter more than money or status. You showed us how to build a life based on what truly matters." Sarah stepped forward, her own children clustered around her. "You gave us a legacy, not of wealth, though we have been comfortable, but of character. Every day we try to live up to the example you set. We want our children to know their grandparents as we knew you, as people of integrity and love." Thomas and Eleanor added their own words of appreciation, and by the time they finished, both Levi and Miriam were wiping tears from their eyes. To know that they had raised their children well, that their love had created a foundation for future generations, was the greatest reward they could imagine. Later that night, alone in the bedroom they had shared for 40 years, Levi and Miriam lay together talking about their life. "Do you think about that day sometimes?" Miriam asked. "The day you rode into that clearing and offered everything for my freedom?" "All the time," Levi admitted. "It was the single best decision I ever made." "You were not scared? You did not doubt?" "I was terrified," Levi said, "but not of losing my possessions. I was terrified that they would refuse, that I would not be able to save you. The things I owned meant nothing compared to your life. And now, knowing everything that came after, would you still make the same choice?" Levi turned to face her fully, his weathered hand cupping her cheek. "Miriam, if I could go back to that moment with all the knowledge I have now, I would not change a single thing. I would make the same choice every time. You were worth it then, and you are worth it now. You will always be worth it." Miriam kissed him, a kiss that held 40 years of love and devotion, of shared joys and sorrows, of a life well lived together. "I love you, Levi Donovan. Thank you for saving me. Thank you for loving me. Thank you for building this beautiful life with me. Thank you for seeing past the rough mountain man to the person underneath," Levi said. "Thank you for taking a chance on me. Thank you for making me happier than I ever dreamed possible." They fell asleep in each other's arms, as they had done thousands of times before, two souls perfectly matched, perfectly content. The years rolled on. Levi and Miriam grew old together, their bodies slowing but their love never diminishing. They watched their grandchildren grow up and start families of their own. They celebrated births and mourned deaths. They adapted to changes in the world around them, seeing the Wild West gradually tame into something more civilized, though the mountains remained as wild and beautiful as ever. When Levi was 72, he and Miriam took one final trip up into the high country. It was harder for them now, their bodies no longer young and strong, but they were determined to see the mountains one more time. They rode slowly, stopping often to rest, but eventually reached the clearing where Levi's original cabin had stood. The structure built by the later settler had long since fallen into ruin, reclaimed by the wilderness. Levi and Miriam walked through the clearing hand in hand, remembering the man he had been when he lived here alone. "I was so lost then," Levi said quietly. "I thought I had everything figured out. I thought solitude and self-sufficiency were enough. I did not realize how empty my life was until you filled it." "We saved each other," Miriam said. "You saved my life that day, but I saved yours too. We gave each other purpose and joy and love. That is what marriage should be, two people making each other better, making each other whole." They stood there for a long time, looking out at the mountains that had been witness to their entire story. Finally, as the sun began its descent toward the peaks, they mounted their horses and made their way back down to the ranch, to their family, to the home they had built together. Neither of them knew it then, but it would be their last trip to the high country. Levi's health began to decline that winter, his strong body finally giving in to age and decades of hard work. He faced his mortality with the same courage he had faced everything else, more concerned about Miriam and his family than himself. On a spring morning when the wildflowers were beginning to bloom and the world was waking up after winter, Levi passed away peacefully in his sleep with Miriam beside him. His last words, whispered in the quiet hours of the night, were, "I love you, Miriam. Thank you for 45 beautiful years." The entire region mourned his passing. Ranchers came from hundreds of miles away to pay their respects to the man who had become a legend in his own right, not for his wealth or success, but for his character and the love story that had defined his life. Miriam survived him by 3 years, long enough to see that their family was secure and thriving, long enough to write down the full story of their life together so that future generations would know how it all began. She remained on the ranch, surrounded by children and grandchildren who loved her, but everyone could see that a part of her had died with Levi. When she finally passed, peacefully in her sleep like her husband, her family buried her next to him on the hilltop where he had proposed, the spot that overlooked the ranch they had built together. The inscription on their shared headstone read simply, "Levi and Miriam Donovan. He gave everything, she gave him everything. Together, they had everything." Their descendants continued to run the ranch for generations, always remembering the story of how it all began. The tale of the mountain man who traded everything to save a stranger, and how that sacrifice had led to one of the greatest love stories the West had ever known, was passed down from parent to child, grandparent to grandchild, never forgotten, never diminished. And high in the mountains, in the clearing where Levi had once lived alone, wildflowers bloomed every spring in brilliant colors, as if the land itself remembered the man who had valued love over possessions, sacrifice over safety, and connection over solitude. The mountains that had been his first home remained wild and beautiful, a testament to the frontier spirit that had built the West. But the true testament to Levi Donovan was not in the mountains or the ranch, or even the material legacy he left behind. It was in the family he and Miriam had created, in the values they had instilled, in the example they had set of what love should be. Generation after generation of Donovans grew up hearing the story of their ancestors, learning that some things are worth any sacrifice, that love is more valuable than gold, and that a life lived with honor and compassion is the richest life of all. The ranch Levi and Miriam built together continued to thrive, but it was more than just a business or a property. It was a home filled with love and laughter and the knowledge that it all started because one man had been willing to give up everything for a stranger, and that stranger had seen past the sacrifice to the heart of the man beneath. In the end, Levi Donovan had been right that day in the Rustlers' camp when he said some things matter more than money. He had proven it with his actions and then spent the rest of his life being rewarded for that proof. He had traded furs and gold and supplies for a woman's freedom, and in return, he received love, family, purpose, and happiness that no amount of material wealth could ever buy. The story of Levi and Miriam became part of the folklore of Colorado, told and retold wherever people gathered to remember the old days. Some details changed in the retelling, embellished or simplified, but the core truth remained the same. A mountain man had loved a woman enough to give up everything for her, and she had loved him enough to build a life that honored that sacrifice. Their legacy lived on in every Donovan who learned to value people over possessions, in every act of selfless kindness inspired by their example, in every young person who heard their story and understood that real love requires sacrifice, courage, and commitment. Levi and Miriam Donovan had lived well, loved deeply, and left the world better than they found it. And in the quiet moments on the ranch, when the sun set over the mountains in brilliant colors and the wind whispered through the pines, those who knew the story could almost feel their presence, two souls forever bound together, forever grateful for the day when a desperate situation brought them together, and love kept them that way for the rest of their lives. The mountains stood eternal, the ranch continued through generations, but the greatest monument to Levi and Miriam's love was not made of stone or wood or earth. It was made of memory, of family, of values passed down through time. It was the knowledge that true love exists, that sacrifice is rewarded, and that sometimes the best things in life come from giving up everything for what truly matters. Their story ended not with tragedy or loss, but with the quiet satisfaction of lives well lived and love fully realized. Levi Donovan had ridden into a Rustlers camp with nothing but hope and determination, willing to trade everything for a stranger's freedom. He left this world decades later, surrounded by family, having gained far more than he ever gave up. And Miriam Crawford Donovan, who had been taken as leverage by cruel men, had been freed by an honorable one, and spent the rest of her life showing him that his sacrifice had been worth it. Every day of their 45 years together had been her gift to him, proof that his choice had been right, that love was indeed worth any price. Together, they had written a love story for the ages, a testament to courage, sacrifice, and the enduring power of human connection. Long after the Wild West faded into history, long after the frontier was tamed and the mountains domesticated by civilization, the story of Levi and Miriam remained, inspiring new generations to believe in love, to value people over things, and to understand that sometimes giving up everything is the only way to gain what truly matters.